I almost bailed on being a filmmaker. And the thing that kept me in the game was the possibility of the Avatar universe reaching a lot of people with a persistent message and reaction on the part of the audience to maybe fight for and protect that which we're losing. Titanic. We talked about literally going to the shipyard in Poland and building the Titanic. I said, all right, great. So they can build the Titanic for us for $10 million? Yeah, we should think about that. Now, if we sink it, how many takes do we get? One. You know what I mean? It's like, what if I want a second take? So anyway, we decided not to build the Titanic as an actual, floatable ship. So then the question is, what do we build? How do we break it down? What do we really need? I had this idea that, look, we've got this great infrastructure just over the border in Mexico. Why can't we get the artists and the craftspeople and everybody and have them ship up to Baja and do it right in Ensenada, just over the border? That way we can have American crew, and we can get some English-speaking extras out of San Diego, and we can bring in thousands of extras like we did from Mexico and thousands of craftspeople and so on. So we decided to do that. We built a studio down there on a bluff overlooking the ocean so that we could sort of see the sea, see the horizon, have a kind of a natural view. And then we'd use, obviously, digital composites for other shots, shoot people in front of blue screen, green screen, all that sort of thing. I actually didn't see Kate at first. She had done a couple of other historical dramas as well, and she was getting a reputation as Corset Kate doing historical stuff. And so I thought, oh man, this is gonna look like the laziest casting in the world. All right, I'll meet her, sure, but I was thinking maybe Gwyneth Paltrow or somebody else. And I met Kate, and she was fantastic. She was fantastic. And so that happened fairly early on. We found Kate. So Leo comes in. I remember there was a meeting with Leo, and then there was a screen test with Leo. So the meeting was funny, because I'm sitting in my conference room waiting to meet an actor, right? And I look around, and all the women in the entire office are in the meeting for some reason. Like there's a female executive producer, okay, fine. But our accountant, why was she in the meeting? They just all wanted to meet Leo. It was hysterical. I looked around and I went, I think I already know the answer to the question here. So Leo came in, of course, charmed everybody, myself included. And I said, all right, well, let's see what your chemistry is like with Kate. So he comes in a couple of days later, and I've got the camera set up to record the video. He didn't know he was going to test. He came in, he thought it was another meeting to meet Kate. And I said, okay, so we'll just go in the next room, and we'll just, we'll run some lines, and I'll video it. And he said, you mean I'm reading? And I said, yeah. He said, oh, I don't read. And I said, well, I shook his hand. I said, well, thanks for coming by. And he said, wait. You mean if I don't read, I don't get the part, just like that? And I said, oh, yeah, come on. This is like a giant movie. It's going to take 2 years of my life, and you'll be gone doing 5 other things while I'm doing post-production and all the model work and everything. So I'm not going to fuck it up by making the wrong decision in casting. So you're going to read or you're not going to get the part. You're like, oh, okay. So he comes in, and he's like every ounce of his entire being is just so, negative, right up until I said action. And then he turned into Jack. And Kate just lit up, and they went into this whole thing, and he played the scene. Dark clouds had opened up, and a ray of sun came down and lit up Jack. I'm like, all right, he's the guy. So then I finally get the studio to agree to it. Then Leonardo comes back in, and he says, my dad and I have been talking about the script, and we really think it needs this and this and this and this. And he wanted to have, some affliction or some problem or some traumatic thing from the past. And I said, look, you've done all these great characters that all have a problem, whether it's addiction or whatever it is. I said, you got to learn how to hold the center and not have all that stuff. This isn't Richard III. When you can do what, Jimmy Stewart did or Gregory Peck did, they just fucking stood there. They didn't have a limp or a lisp or whatever. Then you'll be ready for this, but I'm thinking you're not ready. Because What I'm talking about is actually much harder. Those things are easier. Those are props, those are crutches. What I'm talking about is much harder, and you're probably not quite ready for it. The second I said that, it clicked for him that this was a really hard, challenging film for him. And I realized my mistake. I hadn't laid out the challenge for him sufficiently. You want the actor to love you. You want them to be in your movie. You want them to say yes, so you make it all sound attractive. But he didn't want something that was easy. He wanted something that was hard. And that's been his instinct since then, and it leads to things like The Revenant, right? You don't get any harder than that. He knew how to map a career. He just didn't know specifically what to do in that moment. But you see how fragile this stuff is, because you try to imagine that movie without Leo or Kate. It's very hard to do.
Come, Josephine, my flying machine going up. She goes, up she goes.
We choreographed the kiss in rehearsal weeks ahead of time, so we knew what we were going to do. Even down to I drew little lips on my hands here like this, and I showed them exactly, who's going to lead, who's going to press in, who's going to, like a football play on lips, right? But they're both so analytical, they love that. So we knew what we were going to do. The question is, how were we going to get the elements to agree? We scheduled actually for the first day of our outdoor in case we had a nice sunset, and it never looked good. And we got down, so we burned through our whole 10-day or 2-week window of our exteriors, and we were down to literally, I think, the last day or the second to last day. And it was overcast. And I looked up and I said, we're going to get a sunset tonight. And probably 15 minutes before sunset, it just opened up and turned into these red bands, and the sun came down out of the overcast, and it was like, guys, we got a sunset. So now everybody's running the length of the set to get down to the bow. And Kate had to like whip one outfit off and get another outfit on. And she's sort of doing it in the van, and all her handlers around like a Formula One pit crew. I've never had this happen with an actor in my life before or since. Kate gets up there. She takes one look at the sunset. She turns to me and screams, "Shoot!" Actors they always want more time, so anyway, she's like, "Shoot!" We wound up getting 2 takes. One take was completely out of focus, and the other take was half out of focus. And the one that's half out of focus is in the movie. The Terminator. So I was in Rome, and I was sick. I don't know what with some flu-like virus, and had a bit of a fever, and just had a dream. And it was an image that I remembered when I woke up, an image of a kind of chrome skeleton emerging from a fire. And I always believe that dreams aren't just the image. There's also a kind of narrative metadata that runs with it, an image, where in the dream you know what the image means. In my dream, I knew that all of its outer covering had been burned away by the fire, revealing it as a chrome, what we later termed the endoskeleton. So then looking at it from a purely practical kind of strategic standpoint, how could I, as a filmmaker trying to break in and get a directing gig, design this film so that it was affordable enough that they would trust it to me? I knew I wanted to do some visual effects, but I didn't want to set the whole thing on some other planet or some distant future. So time travel, hey, let's have him zap into our reality from some future reality. Okay, what are they trying to do? Manipulate the past to change the future, that sort of thing. So the pieces fell into place around that seminal image. Arnold came in to talk to me about the character of Reese, supposedly. He had a great deal of enthusiasm for the script in general. And when, he was waxing eloquent about the action scenes, but he kept talking about it kind of from the Terminator's perspective and how cool that was and so on. We didn't talk about Reese as much as I would have expected somebody pitching themselves for that character would have. He just had this kind of generic enthusiasm for the film. I couldn't get over kind of how unique his face was, how it just almost just projected this kind of raw power. And my conception of the character had been that he was more of an infiltrator, but then, my perspective shifted, and I would say it pivoted kind of on a dime. All right, if I cast this guy, how are they not all going to see him coming? How does he not stand out in a crowd? How do they not all look at him? And I thought, you know what? Don't worry about it, because he would make an amazing Terminator. Because I just saw him as like this kind of bulldozer, this kind of armored tank, you know, and he could just move through a crowd. If anybody was in his way, he'd just push them out of the way and you'd accept it. It didn't even have anything to do with the guns. It was just that kind of raw strength, a kind of a machine strength. Stan and I became great friends, and you know, we hit it off right away. I saw the creativity that he had at his disposal with his team. He basically sculpted and created the entire endoskeleton and all the prosthetic makeup and the puppet heads and so on. And we tried to use puppeteered heads for some of it and then transition to prosthetic makeup for other shots. We didn't have CG in those days. Today it's a no-brainer how you do that. It'd be very easy, actually. But back then we had to, you know, we had to be a little bit more clever. We had to figure out how we could get a puppeteered head to match perfectly with Arnold, matching lighting and matching, you know, camera angles and moves and all that sort of thing. Terminator was done on really quite a shoestring budget, and Gail and I came from that same kind of guerrilla background. I was of that ethos that if my hands weren't filthy by the end of the day, I wasn't directing a movie. You know, because I was helping move the lights, helping move the camera, helping set everything up, move the furniture around. That's just how I thought it was. I mean, the culture shock didn't happen for us on the first film. It happened for us on Aliens when we went to England, and they had a whole, you know, it was much more of a kind of suit and tie thing, and the director kind of just sat back and let everybody do their jobs. And I think that the English crew was unsettled, to say the least. I think they were insulted because they thought, I believe they didn't know their jobs and I had to help them. You know, which wasn't it at all. It was just a sort of a muck in and get it done kind of mentality. Plus they were, by the way, slow as shit. So, you know, I thought maybe I'd speed them up a little bit. With Linda, I felt strongly from her audition work that she could do both poles of the character. She could do the kind of, you know, valley girl, just going about her life kind of character, but with some, make her interesting, because she had to be interesting. She had to not be somebody that you would just dismiss. And then she had to have the strength and the courage for the final scenes.
You're a terminated fucker.
Very fortunately, she had that in spades in a way that was never really realized in the first film. We didn't really see it until Linda trained and prepared herself for the second film, and then a whole new version of Sarah Connor emerged. And that's, I think, when she became a kind of feminist icon. She really flourished in the role, and you saw a whole nother level, not only of her as an actor, but kind of Sarah as a character, as a planner, as somebody who is incredibly disciplined and focused, physically strong. I've always joked that Linda could just walk by a stack of weights and she'd gain muscle. Even when she trained lightly, she'd get quite buff, but she trained pretty seriously for, I want to say, probably 5 hours a day, weights and movement and weapons training and all that sort of thing. The second Terminator film, it was 6 years later when I wrote the script, 7 years later. And a lot of things had changed for me. I'd done much bigger stuff, and a lot of things had changed for Arnold. He was a big star. So the business case was a very different business case. We knew we could afford more. I didn't set out to make a $100 million movie. I set out to make a movie. I thought it would be maybe $50 million or something like that. I went back to an idea that I had had for the original Terminator, which is of the liquid metal robot from the future as well. They're kind of their most advanced being. They send the guy back that scares them, that they didn't use the first time because it was too unpredictable. They didn't know what was going to happen if they turned this thing loose. And then I had to find the right guy to play him. Robert Patrick obviously was a great choice. He really just inhabited that role. But of course the other thing was we wanted to push the CG, the liquid metal surface, the morphing. So some fun challenges and taking CG to the next level. Budget came out to somewhere in the 80 millions, you know. It was over 80 million, and I thought, holy crap. But that's what we went off at. That's what Carolco greenlit with a big gulp. And then as production went on, it crept up. And as it was, you know, kind of approaching 100 million, they were blanching. They thought they were screwed. And then it went out to be the biggest hit of the year. And so it all paid off. But it certainly felt like gloom and doom at the time. Avatar.
Can you hear me, Jake?
Your blurry reflex is good.
Pin response normal. How you feeling, Jake?
Hey, guys.
Stan Winston and I form a company called Digital Domain to create CG world CG characters. Somewhere around 95, we founded it in 92, kind of came online in 93. I wanted to write something that I thought of as a provocation, something that I would go get financing for, and as a filmmaker, I could encourage / kick everybody up the backside to generate all this new technology. So I wrote Avatar, which was a kitchen sink approach. It wasn't a smart approach. I just threw everything into it that I thought would be cool. And so we sat, we had technical meetings. I talked about, I want to do facial performance capture. I want to do it with a camera. But they said, we can't get there from here. We can't get to what you want to create within a single movie cycle. We have to do other projects first and build the tool set and work our way up to it. And by the way, other people would be doing it, because the rising tide of CG was lifting all the ships in the entertainment industry at the same time, and people were developing new tools all over the place. So that was in 95. I got it out and dusted it off in 2005. I was hitting a wall. I wanted to make Battle Angel. I was 3 scripts in, and I still wasn't liking it. And I thought, man, I better have a backup plan here. So I got out Avatar and I read it, and I went, oh, this is pretty good. You know, this is actually not a bad story. So then we put Battle Angel and Avatar on a parallel track to develop the facial capture tools, and we thought, maybe we flip a coin. We'll do one first and then the other. And I was thinking we'd probably do Battle Angel first, then Avatar. But then we got to the eve of our big test, and there wasn't a scene written for the test. And I thought, all right, well, I better write a scene. And so then I looked through the Battle Angel script, and there wasn't a scene that was CG character to CG character. And I thought, well, there's nothing I can take from that. Well, all right, I'll look in the Avatar treatment, which was 80 pages long, and there was a scene that was pretty well fleshed out, and it was when Jake first meets Neytiri in the forest. And I said, let's just do this. The decision was actually made without realizing it, that we were going to do Avatar first, because once we got into that, it just seemed more and more obvious that we needed to make that movie. John Landau, my producing partner, and I looked at each other and said, we're doing Avatar. We're not using photography. We're using performance capture. So there is no world that I can show the actors other than having them come over and look at the monitor and see the results of my virtual camera pass. And the interesting thing is, it turns out they're not that interested. They'll typically do it at the beginning of a scene, so they see the setting. Okay, it's a sunset, there's a waterfall over there, there's some creatures over here. But they quickly forget that, or it's not really important. What's important is the other actor. Actors just need other actors. I've been a climate activist since high school. The film wouldn't have existed if I hadn't been, because the head of 20th Century Fox said, well, I like the story, it's a good script, can we get all this tree-hugging hippie bullshit out of it? And I said, actually no, because the reason I want to make the film is exactly because of the tree-hugging, hippie, hairy-legged, Birkenstocks-wearing, you know, bullshit. What happened after the film came out, indigenous leadership in various parts of the world approached me and said, your film is showing the type of thing that we're actually going through for real. And there was, you know, sort of the unstated request was, how can you help us? How can you help get our real story out in front of people the way you did this fictional story? So yeah, then I went on a couple of years of actually becoming an overt activist and trying to help them, whether it was the Athabasca tar sands or down in Brazil with the Belo Monte Dam and all that. And eventually I realized, okay, I can just be another drive-by do-gooder, or I can go make more Avatar movies and reach a much wider audience, maybe with a somewhat diluted message because it's interwoven with entertainment, but maybe throw a much broader net. So that was the point at which I decided to go ahead and make more Avatar films, which was actually a difficult decision. because I had a lot of things I was interested in terms of ocean conservation and sustainable agriculture, a lot of projects I was working on that I had to turn away from to go back into the saddle as a filmmaker. I almost bailed on being a filmmaker. And the thing that kept me in the game was the possibility of the Avatar universe reaching a lot of people with a persistent kind of emotional message and reaction on the part of the audience to maybe fight for and protect that which we're losing. I knew I was embarking on a multi-year, really a kind of decadal project. Of course, everybody was just anxious for the sequel, so it always seemed like it was getting put off and put off and put off. It really never got put off until we hit the pandemic and we had to push out a year, because we had never really decided when we were going to start. We were going to start production at the moment that we had everything in a nice pile, right? So there was technology, there was design, there were the scripts. It was a year and a half to generate 3 scripts, and then 6 months for me to realize that the first script needed to be 2 movies. And then 18 months for me to go back and redraft and personally write all 4 of the shooting scripts, including the split of the first sequel. So we started production in literally 5 years ago, September of 17. It's taken that 5 years to shoot all of Avatar 2, Avatar 3, part of Avatar 4, and then post-production on Avatar 2 and parts of Avatar 3. Because parts of Avatar 3 are actually already in work at Weta Digital as we speak. The new film is much, much more nuanced in terms of performance, much more complex emotionally, I think, than the first film by a country mile, maybe an order of magnitude. The number of emotional scenes, big close-ups, that sort of thing that we have in the new film is probably, 5 to 10 times what we had in the first film. Not to diminish the first film. The first film was more about the awe and wonder. This is more about the characters. Aliens. I had people who were trying to advise me on my career after Terminator say, absolutely do not do this film, meaning Aliens. Said if it's good, they're going to attribute it to Ridley, and if it's bad, it's all you. There's no upside. And I thought, well, you're probably right, and that's very logical, but I just dig it and I'm going to do it. I just like it. The only variable for me was Sigourney, getting her into it, because they had assured me they had her under an option for a sequel option. And so I went off and wrote this thing. Okay, I'm going to get to work with Sigourney. This will be cool. I'll go off and write for 6 months. I come back, lo and behold, no option. They haven't even talked to her. So now it's up to me to land Sigourney, to talk her into doing this film. I don't know her from a stranger on the street. So I call her up and send her the script, and she agrees to meet with me. So I went up there, kind of butterflies in the stomach, because everything I'd done in preparation for this film, she could shoot it all down. She, it turns out, had been really taken by the story. And so she was really leaning in. She wanted to do it. And then her agents got into it, of course, and asked for the moon. And then the studio said, absolutely no way. And then the whole thing fell apart again. Gail and I said, okay, fuck all of y'all. We're going to get married in Hawaii, and it's all off. And we just walked away. And then they went, wait a minute, did they just walk away? They can't do that. And so, but you can. This is just like movies. How movies happen and don't happen. There's always a story behind the story. And so I called up Lou Pitt, Arnold's agent, and I said, Lou, we're kind of over this, right? So we've decided that we really like the story and all the Marine Corps characters and the world that we've created and everything, and that really we've thought about it, and we really just don't need Sigourney. I've created all these characters, and my pride of authorship tells me I should go ahead with this, and we'll just cut her out of it, and we'll just cut her character out of it. We won't recast it. I'll just rewrite it. So I'm going to start on that tonight. Now, did I have any intention of doing that whatsoever? No, not at all. But I happen to know that Lou is at the same agency as Sigourney's agent, who is in New York. And I knew that the second he hung up with me, he called him and said, sign Sigourney now. And guess what? The deal was done in 12 hours after that. So I never wrote a word of that hypothetical story that I said I was going to do that I had no intention of writing anyway. So anyway, it worked. And Sigourney got her $1 million, and everybody was happy.
away from her, you bitch!
I'd actually been writing this thing a couple of years earlier when I was still working for Roger Corman called Mother. It was a science fiction story and it ended in this kind of elemental battle between the main character using a power suit and this mother creature that was defending her children. I wonder where aliens came from. It was basically just a revamp of that story. So the power loader was innate already to that story. Where I got the idea before that, exosuits had been in the literature. The Forever War, they had these kind of power suits that were kind of half spacesuit, half power suit. Starship Troopers had these kind of exo frames that they used to carry heavy loads. It's like all the stuff that DARPA has developed now for actual use in infantry warfighting. And so if you think about it, I went from endoskeleton in Terminator to exoskeleton in Aliens. The Abyss. Well, I always saw the deep ocean as kind of inner space, as having the same appeal as outer space, having that same kind of remote frontier, dangerous, not for the faint of heart, you know, the blackness, the fact that the sun doesn't reach there, you have to use high technology and trust it to get down there. And I had written a little story in high school called The Abyss. After Aliens, you know, I thought, well, I'll just do The Abyss. I'll just write a story around that. So, but then I added in the element of, you know, kind of an extraterrestrial intelligence or a non-terrestrial intelligence, as I called it in that, and used it as a kind of a first contact story taking place instead of in outer space, in inner space, in the deep. More of a Close Encounters than it was a follow-on to Aliens. You know, I didn't want too much of the military stuff. I didn't want too much of that sort of conventional action. All movies are hard. You know, they're long hours. There's never enough time. You don't get enough sleep. Everybody's working really hard. And then you add water to it and it becomes, you know, well nigh impossible or insurmountable. But fortunately, I happen to like big challenges and I love being underwater. And I thought the idea of the movie was really cool. So, you know, nothing was going to stop us. So we had to figure out, you know, helmets so the actors could breathe underwater and the lighting and all that. And we basically took underwater lighting from a very primitive standpoint. They were lighting sets on the deep with 500-watt lights. So imagine you walk into a set the size of a big soundstage and your lighting kit consists of a 500-watt bulb. You're not going to make it through the first day as a DP. You're going to get fired when you open your lighting kit. But that's all that existed. So we went to some engineers and said, what can you do? One engineer told us, you're all going to die. You're all going to get electrocuted. The other engineer said, oh, I know what to do. We'll use HMI bulbs and we'll use double inline ground fault interrupters to make sure that there's no short circuiting that injures anybody. And that's what we did. So we went with engineer B, clearly, a guy named Pete Romano.
Bud? Oh, wait, it's okay.
Sweet Christ almighty.
I think it likes you.
I came up with this idea for this alien probe that I called the pseudopod. And so the pseudopod was a water tentacle. It could lift itself off the ground. It obviously could sense its environment. It could image its environment and so on. I didn't know how to achieve it. I had the idea for it. And there were some non-CGI solutions that we explored. I talked to Dennis Murin at ILM. He said, have you thought about doing it as computer-generated animation? And they were just getting into it themselves, and for me it was an unknown terrain. I didn't really drive this. I took the leap of faith based on Dennis assuring me that it could be done. Now, I hadn't worked with Dennis before, but I knew him by reputation, and he just had this very calm, very zen demeanor. And he said they could do it, and they did. And it took them probably a year and a half to do 16 shots. Now, cut to 33 years later right now, we're doing 3,000 shots in 2 years on Avatar 2. The rate of everything has accelerated. The pipelines have accelerated. Back then, it was very much pioneering work and handwork by the animators.